we thought it might be helpful to give you all just a quick little guide, some acronyms, a few more letters. Actually, they're not really letters. It's more like alliteration. I worked really hard to make sure that they were all A words, but we have a 3-step process for you for PCSing. You guys feel free to chime in, but I'll try to hit these points pretty quickly on what you can do now. Right? So you got your orders, you got your requests for orders. What are some things that you can do right now to start preparing for your PCS, even though there's nothing you can actually maybe physically do just yet, right? So maybe you're looking at a summertime or, a June. Let's just pretend like June is like the magic date for us. Okay. So what are we doing? The first thing that you want to do, number 1, assess your needs. This is one thing that I'm huge on this just in general. I think self-awareness is like key to just about any decisions that you need to be making or will be faced with in life. So this applies to your family as well and your housing needs as well. So go ahead and assess what your family needs look like. Do that now while things are relatively calm, right? And you've got a bit of a stasis happening, right? There's not huge fluctuations in things. So that's talking about things like your budget. There's going to be a huge fluctuation in your budget during a PCS. It just is what it is. But if you kind of know what your like sort of status quo is on your budget and what things, you make room for and prioritize for yourself and your family and your household, those are good things to know because then you know your baseline. You need to know what your priorities are, right? So these are things like faith communities or, outdoorsy type access or fitness facilities, things like that. If you have priorities, like what are your non-negotiables, the things that make you happy, that bring you joy in your life and we call it your pattern of life, right? What is your pattern of life? What does your typical Sunday look like? What does your typical Wednesday look like? Do you need to be near the sports complexes for the kids that play soccer? Or are you looking more towards a metropolitan area that will fulfill your nightlife itch? Things like that. Having a really clear understanding of what your priorities are as a household, as a family, is I think just your first step, because then you can start to fill those blanks in versus just kind of starting from scratch and wondering why it feels like something is missing, right? Step number 2 is you're going to start accumulating information. So you need to figure out your who, your what, your why, your when, your how. All of these little basic pieces of information about what the area, we're still talking about researching your new duty station, right? So you need to sort of get a clear picture on what it looks like to live at that installation, okay? There are a few things I want to point out here when you're accumulating this information, right? So I want you to stay as objective as possible, right? So not hearsay, not like, oh, that place is so blank, right? Everybody's got opinions. This is true. And word of mouth is valuable and important, but make sure that you're staying objective. Do they or do they not have a Starbucks, right? That is a data point that is clearly objective. Not how awesome or gross is the Starbucks, but do they have one or not? So just making sure that you're trying to keep, emotions and bias out of your decisions and out of your accumulation of information so that it doesn't become sort of shaded in any way. The reality is, y'all, and then here's the point. The reality is that you're not changing your orders. You're going where you're going, okay? So you can go into it with a good attitude or a bad attitude. And the more bias you have, the more bad attitude is going to follow. So if you could stay as objective as possible, then you can focus on the right things, right? And staying positive. You want to make sure that you're being inclusive in the information that you are looking for. So don't put yourself in a silo, right? Don't convince yourself that you only like, the historic neighborhoods and that's all you're willing to consider. Maybe you might actually find more benefit in living in an area that maybe you hadn't ever considered before, because you've learned to open your aperture a little bit, so to speak. You're opening up your possibilities of where you might be happy, and then making sure that the information that you are accumulating is relevant. I am super guilty of going down rabbit holes and chasing down really irrelevant information, which is kind of great to know trivially, but it doesn't necessarily help me when it comes to making my decision about where to live, right? So just try to stay focused, I guess, is the key here. All right, your third, or actually, let me take that back. After you've gotten through those first 2 steps, you've assessed your needs and you've accumulated enough information, you've now reached your first decision point. So assuming before this point you've already decided to pursue living off the installation, most people do. You're looking at about 70-ish% of folks who are in the military live off the installation for a variety of reasons, but it's a very popular choice. So assuming that's the choice that you've made, you're going to look at either renting a home or buying a home. Now, again, there are plenty of reasons why you would choose one or the other. And we're not here to tell you one's better or one's not, because it's a very individualized decision. But once you've accumulated enough information and you understand very clearly what your situation is, right? What your budget will allow, what your priorities are, what your future looks like, those sorts of things, you're now at a decision point so you can pursue sort of one lane or the other. I will also add, though, that even especially this year, you might want to stay open. Like, this isn't a hard decision. This is kind of one of those soft decisions. You're going to pursue buying a house, but if you're looking at like, oh, actually, it might be best for us to rent right now, you want to stay open to that as well. Semper Gumby, right? Isn't that what our Marine friends say? Okay, so the third step then is to assemble your team. So you're not doing this alone. I can't stress this enough. We want you to know that you have folks who are ready to support you. So if you're looking at renting a house specifically, we have our awesome Millie Scouts who are standing by to help be your eyes and ears and boots on the ground to gather some of that objective information, right, that we talked about before. They can sort of fill in some of the information gaps that come from not being there physically. So they can help you with that. And they can also just help in a variety of ways. I mean, you're looking at Jana and Nicole and Megan, and those are your folks that you can reach out to and just be like, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about XYZ? And they're happy to help you do that and sort of just be somebody on your side, right? All right, we also have our Agent Hero Network, which you're going to hear more about later on. Those are all vetted by us real estate agents who are all military veterans or spouses. That's the number one criteria. We also vet for experience, for reputation. We make sure that they adhere to our values as a company. They are amazing folks, and we highly encourage, regardless of who you work with, if you're looking at purchasing a house, that you spend a lot of time interviewing and making sure that these folks are savvy with the military lifestyle and the VA loan specifically. And, you know, we have other insights on choosing an agent to work with, but that is not a decision to be made lightly. So again, it gets its own bullet point here on Assemble Your Team. All right, the other thing to think about are people like your lenders or anyone else that's involved in this huge transaction. Again, if you decide to buy, those are all folks you can interview as well. I mean, believe it or not, like I think a lot of times we are convinced in the military that we just have to go with what we got, right? You just take what you get and don't pitch a fit, right? It's not always the case. You actually do have some control over these decisions, and we want to empower you guys to feel confident in doing so. So just to point out a couple more resources that we have available, all of the Millie resources are free. That we have toolkits, we have our base guides that will tell you a lot about the duty stations. We also have a Move concierge that you'll hear about more about soon, but these are folks who can help you do some of the nitty-gritty transferring of things when it comes to a PCS. So think about your utilities or your cable, or actually hiring a mover if you decide to do your own move, right? Things like that we can help you with. And then we also have our services, which we talked about just now, our Agent Heroes and our Scouts. So hopefully that will help sort of just give you a bit of an orientation around some of the first steps that we need to be thinking about when it comes to researching for your next duty station, for your first PCS, or like I said, your 15th.